about something you've been putting off. I'm not talking about a chore, not the bed that you haven't made in the last 2 weeks. Something that actually matters to you. An email you haven't sent, a project you keep saying you'll start next month, a conversation you've rehearsed in your head a dozen times but you never had. You know the one that I'm talking about. You can feel it right now sitting in the back of your mind. And now ask yourself, what's actually the worst thing that happens if you do it? Not the story your brain tells you. The actual realistic worst case. Email gets ignored. The project doesn't work. The conversation is awkward for a couple of minutes. But that's it. You end up exactly where you are right now. Nothing changes. And now think about what happens if you keep not doing it. For another year. For another 3 years. Another 5. That's the part your brain won't show you. Because doing nothing feels like staying safe. And your threat detection system was never built to flag the dangers that arrive slowly. Brain imaging research on social rejection found that the exact same neural circuits that process physical pain light up when someone experiences exclusion. Your brain literally treats being judged by a group the same way it treats being hit, and for good reason. That system kept your ancestors alive when being cast out meant death. Now it just means you're afraid to post a video, and while it's busy protecting you from things that can't actually hurt you, the things that are quietly destroying your position don't register at all. Your heart rate spikes before you hit publish. Cortisol floods your systems before you send the cold email. Every cell in your body builds a case for staying quiet and staying invisible. The feeling is real, but the threat itself isn't. Nobody's ever been physically harmed by a blog post that underperformed. Nobody's lost their home because a cold email got ignored. The worst realistic outcome of almost every perceived risk is that nothing changes. You're in the same position you were in before, minus a couple of minutes of discomfort. Now notice what your nervous system never flags. Staying in a role that stopped developing you 3 years ago. That generates zero alarm. It feels stable. It feels responsible. But every year you stay is a year of compounding you're not doing somewhere else. The skills that made you valuable 3 years ago are depreciating, especially in today's economy with AI. Markets shift, industries restructure. If you spend 6 years coasting on a position that stopped growing, you didn't avoid risk. You accumulated it. It was just quietly, invisibly, and all of it compounding in the wrong direction. And it all shows up at once. The layoff email, the industry shift. The moment you look around and realize you have no options because you never built any. People treat that moment like it came out of nowhere. It didn't come from nowhere. It compounded for years while your threat detection system was busy panicking about an Instagram post. The pattern is always the same. The things that trigger the most anxiety carry the least actual downside. The things that carry the most actual downside generate no anxiety at all because they don't feel like decisions. They just feel like another Tuesday. And if your threat detection is that badly miscalibrated, every instinct you have about what's safe and what's dangerous is suspect. All of it. Which raises a harder question. If you can't trust your instincts about risk, what do you do instead? Watch anyone who performs at a high level under pressure and you'll notice something that looks like emotional control, but it's actually something more specific. They're not mentally tougher than everyone else. They've already lived through the scenario before it arrived. A grandmaster doesn't panic when their opponent plays something unexpected because they've already sat with hundreds of possible positions in their mind before the game started. A fighter who has visualized getting dropped in the first round recovers and adjusts. A fighter who never imagined it gets flooded with adrenaline and starts swinging wildly. It could be the exact same event, but the mental preparation determined the cost. The emotional charge of any setback comes from the gap between what you expected and what actually happened. If you expected to get the promotion and you didn't, you're devastated. If you knew going into it was a coin flip, the same outcome stings, but you can think clearly. Again, the exact same result, but you have a completely different experience. The variable was never the event. It was whether you'd already processed it. This is why the miscalibrated risk perception does damage beyond just the misread itself. If you think your position is safe, you're not running scenarios. You're not imagining what happens if this doesn't work out. So when someone or something disrupts the position you thought was secure, the surprise is total. And surprise is what turns a setback into a crisis. Not the actual event, the surprise. And the fix is simple. Even if it's uncomfortable, before any significant decision, before any moment where the outcome matters, spend time genuinely imagining the worst realistic outcome. And this is pretty much what I do all day in different scenarios. Before I get in the car and before I drive, I imagine getting cut off in traffic, someone sideswiping me. And the difference between someone who has road rage and someone who stays calm in those situations is they envision all the possible scenarios. Like I said, imagine the worst realistic outcome, not the catastrophic fantasy your anxiety generates, the actual probable downside, and then play it forward. What does day 1 look like? Day 30? Day 90? What moves do you still have left? 2 things happen when you do this consistently. Firstly, the realistic downside almost always turns out to be smaller than the vague anxiety suggested. Risk that stays abstract feels infinite. Risk that gets specific shrinks. Secondly, you've preloaded the emotional response. If the bad outcome arrives, your brain has already been there. The shock is gone. You already processed it on your own terms, not in the moment when you need to think clearly. And again, that's not toughness, that's preparation, and it's available to anyone willing to sit with uncomfortable hypotheticals before they become reality. But even if you fix your threat detection and train your emotional processing, there's a third inversion that costs people more than the first 2 combined. And almost nobody sees it because it's disguised as fairness. Most people believe the world works roughly like a meritocracy. You do good work, and the good work gets recognized. You're loyal, and the loyalty gets valued. You develop your skills, and the compensation follows. And when the compensation doesn't follow, they work harder. They think the problem is that they haven't demonstrated enough value yet. The problem was never the value. The world doesn't pay you for how good you are. It pays you for how hard you are to replace, and those are very different things. Being great at your job doesn't get you a raise. Being great at your job while your employer knows that you have a credible alternative, that gets you a raise. The skill can be the same in both scenarios, but the positioning around the skill is completely different. And the positioning is what moves the number. There's a saying that I always think of. You don't get paid what you're worth. You get paid what you negotiate. Think about any negotiation you've ever been in or watched. The party who needed the deal less had more power. Always. A founder desperate for funding accepts terrible terms because they have no alternatives. A founder with 3 term sheets dictates the conversation. The quality of their companies might be the exact same, but the leverage isn't. And leverage is the only variable the other side is actually responding to. This is where the miscalibrated risk perception gets extremely expensive. If you think your position is strong because you're good at what you do, but you have no alternatives, no competing interests, no independent income, no transferable skills, no visibility outside of the one company, your position is actually weak. You just can't see it because the surface looks fine. You're employed. You're getting paid. Probably respected. But the person deciding your compensation knows exactly how strong your position is. They know whether you have options or whether you'll accept whatever they offer because you have nowhere else to go. And they price you accordingly, not based on your talent, but based on your leverage. Leverage has to be built before the negotiation, not during it. You can't manufacture a competing offer the afternoon you want to ask for a raise. You can't build a personal brand the week after you get laid off. Leverage is a background process. It compounds slowly, invisibly, and it feels completely pointless right up until the single moment where it determines everything. Again, the same talents, the same efforts, but completely different outcomes because the variable was never the merit. It was the position built around the merit. But leverage only matters if you understand the actual game you're building it in. And most people are playing a game that was ascribed to them by people who benefit from their participation. The final inversion is the hardest one to talk about because the entire culture of ambition and self-improvement is built on the opposite message. The structure of any economy requires far more people working inside systems than building their own. Every business employs more people than it was founded by. Every product reaches customers through a supply chain of people working within someone else's operation. When someone says anyone can build their own thing, that's true. That's true in an individual sense. Any specific person with a real edge, enough runway, and the right positioning can do it. But anyone can and everyone will are structurally different statements. Most content in this space creates an implicit hierarchy where building your own thing is at the top and working for someone else is settling. That framing pushes people into decisions that don't match their situation, their temperament, or their actual odds. They jump in without an edge. They take on overhead that they can't sustain. They burn 2 years and end up back where they started with less savings and even more doubt. Now, if you have a genuine persistent pull towards building something independent, you should act on it, seriously. But act on it knowing the path is narrow, the survival rate is low, and the game is tilted toward people with more runway and more leverage than you probably have right now. And that awareness shouldn't discourage you. It should make you more deliberate about building an edge before you leap. And if you don't feel that pull, if you want to do excellent work inside of someone's organization and build a stable life, that's not considered failure. The mistake isn't choosing one path over the other. The mistake is not choosing deliberately. If you sleepwalk into a career because you didn't think about it, or you jump into being an entrepreneur because someone on the internet made it sound easy, both of them are traps, and both of them cost you years. Everything in this video comes back to one thing. You've been trusting the surface, the feeling of safety, the feeling of fairness, the feeling that the rules work the way that they were described to you, and the surface has been lying to you for years. The things that scare you are mostly harmless. The things that are actually costing you generate no fear at all. Your emotional reactions aren't giving you accurate information about severity. They're reacting to surprise. And you can eliminate most of that surprise by doing the uncomfortable work of imagining outcomes before they arrive. You're being priced on your position, not your talent. And position is something you have to build deliberately in the years before it matters. And the game itself has rules that nobody advertises. And the people who navigate it well are the ones who figured out the actual rules. Every year you spend trusting the surface instead of auditing what's underneath is a year the gap between where you are and where you could be gets wider. That gap doesn't announce itself, it just compounds. 2 questions worth sitting with. What are you avoiding right now that has almost no realistic downside? And what are you tolerating right now that's quietly compounding against you? The answer to both of these is probably the most important strategic information you have, and your instincts are actively hiding it from you. The forms of leverage that actually compound, the ones that change your position permanently, that's a different conversation, and I broke it down here.